Good morning. Boker Tov to everyone. And thank you for joining us as we are going to study a little bit of Parshat Vayera. Today's shir is sponsored by Nochum and Sandy Wolf, and also by Leon and Aviva Woznika. It's to commemorate the yahrzeit of Sandy and Aviva's father, Pesach Ben Avram Abba. The yahrzeit was on Shabbos. So may the neshama benefit from our words of Torah. Okay, and we thank you very much for the sponsorship. Neshama should have an aliyah, and hopefully we'll have some clarity in this parsha, even though we're not having clarity of picture. Parshas Vayera, as we all know, starts off with God appearing to Avram. There are two ways to understand this appearance. Is this an appearance that is having very limited description? In other words, the first verse describes God appearing, but then afterwards it moves on to the well-known story with these angels that sit down for a meal by him, and they have a gesunte milchik and fleischig meal. So there are really two ways to understand the first verse. Is the first verse an introduction? And perhaps when we are told that God appeared to him, it is there to describe the rest of the section. Or, and this is Rashi's approach. We're going to work with Rashi's approach. Rashi is of the opinion that Avram Avinu is sitting there, he's meditating, right? He's a spiritual person, and meditating and thinking about God is something that all good Jews should do, right? You're sitting in traffic, perhaps you're sitting somewhere where the weather is nice and you could be outdoors, not like here, and you appreciate the magnificence of nature. You could relate to God. And it appears that the more spiritual you are, the more of a connection you feel. And some people reach a level that they actually sense God speaking to them. That's a nevuah. That's a prophecy. And God appears to Avraham as he is meditating. He's on a very high spiritual level. The 99-year-old man just had his bris milah. He is a complete individual at this point. His name indicates that he has this very special role now, and God appears to him. The Torah tells us that actually the appearance occurred in the Elonei, in the plains of Mamre. Mamre, one of his colleagues, and Avram is present there. The rabbis tell us that Mamre is a lucky man. Think about it. Here is a person who's not Jewish, lives 3,700 years ago, and here we are sitting with this text that has guided us for centuries upon centuries, and we read his name. Now that's covet. You know, we all have this desire a little bit for some honor and recognition. There's no question here that we are dealing here with the greatest of all honors. We are mentioning his name in a positive way. Avram is present there as this experience is taking place. Why is Mamre so lucky? Why is he so lucky? So Chazal tell us that Avram actually, as he is informed that he is going to perform the Brit Milah, has a little bit of a dilemma. Do I go ahead and publicize this? In other words, Avraham was a public figure. And to be a public figure, there's always a challenge there. You know, celebrities are public figures. But really what the celebrities want is that they should be public when they want to be public. But if they want to go ahead and enjoy themselves at a party, at a bar, and they want to hang out with some buddies and perhaps do some things that are not ideal, they would prefer not to be public at that moment. They don't want anyone to know about it. And that's why they get sometimes very upset and agitated, because Nebach, right? They are public people and everyone's following them every minute. Avraham Avinu, due to the fact that he's a consistent person, it is not that he worships God between 9 and 5 and can take off a few weeks during the summer. This is a spiritual being that has one mission, one goal, right? To have an impact on the world, to teach them about the higher being, to tell them about what values are really about and how you are supposed to be a spiritual being. There was no such thing as a vacation. And as a result, he would have no problem having a camera in his tent streaming the whole 24 hours a day, right? 6 hours or 6 days a week, 24 hours a day. He would have no problem the public knowing what he was doing, because it was a person that was there for the sake of having an impact and a person that was consistent. That is Avraham Avinu. Everything is public. Now suddenly is informed that he is supposed to do something that is not required by others. Avraham is not told, and now be sure to preach and call out in the name of God and tell everyone to go ahead and have a Brit Milah. No such commandment. That was not taking place. So number one, that which was performed, there was no need for the public to know about it. Number two, it wasn't so rational. In other words, Avraham Avinu in general is a very rational person, right? He talks about, as we say often, when the prophets and individuals like Avraham Avinu tell humanity, stop with this avodah zarah, it's not just that it's wrong, it's destructive. Paganism at that time meant to offer children as sacrifices, right? They say that even in the Mayans in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So I remember as a kid going to a museum, and they mentioned that human sacrifice appears to be part of their culture. Avraham Avinu is telling us it's not what God Almighty wants. What does he want? Create a just society. Do acts of tzedakah, right? Be humble as you walk before the God. So therefore, when the rational person does something that cannot really be explained and is not required from others that they do it as well, he's thinking to himself, maybe I could shut off my 24-hour cam and maybe I don't have to tell anyone about it. Meaning, let me do this in a very private way. But his colleague Mamre says to him, Avram, that's not the way to do it. If God tells you to do it, it could be in the most public way possible, not the actual act, but the fact that you performed the Brit Milah. And when people ask you, are you recovering from surgery? And you could say yes, and they'll ask you why. And you'll give a few details of what took place. And when they ask you, are you Meshuggah? You'll say, no, God Almighty told me to do it. God Almighty told me to perform the Brit Milah. Worry not. You could communicate even those things that are not rational, because the way you retain those things that are rational is by keeping something irrational in the midst. And what do we mean by that? If all of Judaism is that which makes sense, right? If all of Judaism is that, it's about tikkun olam, it's about chesed, mishpat, if it's all about that which humanity appreciates and understands and is rational, what happens when the times change, right? What happens when values change? What happens when things that 20 years ago seemed wrong, right? When you have two people of the same gender and they want to come together and have a relationship. When 25 years ago, no one would call it a marriage, today, right, 100%, it has to be considered a marriage according to society. So values in society change. So what's going to go ahead and preserve, right, even those things that are rational, only if you keep something that doesn't make sense, but you say it is from the higher being. It keeps it is really an anchor. It's an anchor to human behavior. And this is what Mamre is telling him. When you share it with people, they might think you're crazy, right? And you have to act sometimes not just as a more, as a teacher, but sometimes you have to act as a little bit of a rebel, a mamre. And that's why Mamre is the one that gives him this piece of advice. He gives him this piece of advice. Do it and tell people about it. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be concerned that it's going to have an impact on your general messages. And that's why Mamre, here we are, 3,700 years later, we say, Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei Mamre. So an incredible merit. And the Parsha begins with this, and it ends with this idea as well, because the Akedah was also such an act that was not rational, but not what we're going to be focusing on now. Now, the angels come. We're familiar with this story. And according to tradition, 3 angels make their appearance, Gabriel, Michael, Raphael. Each one has a unique role. When it comes to Michael, which is the attribute of kindness of the Almighty, it is to inform Abraham that he's going to have a child. When it comes to Gabriel, the mightiness of God, well, his agenda actually is to destroy Sodom. When it comes to Raphael, Abraham Avinu needed a cure, and he needed a refuah. Therefore, Raphael makes his appearance here as well. In the merit of Abraham, Lot is saved, and therefore Raphael travels with Gabriel, right, the angel of justice, to go ahead and destroy Sodom. This is how the commentators and Chazal explain to us that which is occurring in the section itself. Now, the city of Sodom, we're going to focus a little bit on the city of Sodom itself. We've all heard of the Midrashim, of how corrupt the city was, how destructive it was, a city that had everything but was not interested in helping the outsider, a city that if a person was caught, right, performing an act of kindness, they would be sent to death. These are things we are familiar with. But what I would like to focus on now is a little bit on Avraham Avinu's negotiations. The first Jew negotiating with a higher authority or negotiating period. And it's always a fascinating section, especially those who enjoy looking at numbers. It's always a fascinating section. So if you have a Chumash in front of you, we have God Almighty informing Avraham, you know what? Listen here. You are Av Hamon Goim. You know, you're like a father to humanity. A father has concern for the welfare of children. And therefore, you are connected to them. And I'm going to inform you. And God Almighty wanted this prayer. This was a very desirable prayer of the Almighty. It's always fascinating how when sometimes you hear of corruption that's taking place, your natural tendency might be, God Almighty, get rid of them, not Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu is a man of kindness, and his desire is that they change. So we'll go through the negotiations a little bit and focus on a few differences there. Number one, so in verse 24, it's chapter 18, Abraham stands in prayer and he says, listen here, there are 5 cities there. Sodom, by the way, was the hub, the metropolis, according to Chazal. And there were 4 additional cities. And when Avraham Avinu is praying with an understanding that there has to be merits to save these 5 cities, so the natural number to start, the opening price is, Ulai yesh chamishim tzadikim betoch ha'ir. Perhaps there are 50 people. And the 50, by the way, don't have to be dispersed 10 per area, but Sodom was really the hub. And therefore, if there are 50 in Sodom, they have enough of a reason to survive. Ha'aftispei turns to God Almighty, are you going to go ahead and destroy it because of the 50? God responds, you should know, if there are 50 within the city, I'm not going to go ahead. Nasati lechol hamakom ba'avuram. They're going to be saved. But God's indicating that I'm not planning to save them. Abraham understands that he has to lower and perhaps request for a number that is a bit less. So in verse 27, he turns to the next number. Ulai, verse 28, Yachserun chamishim tzadikim chamisha. Hatashchit v'chamisha. If there are 45, God, what about 45? And God says, Lo ashchit. I'm not going to destroy the city if there are 45 in the city. And then he moves on to 40, 30, 20, and 10. And we have a clear understanding that due to the fact that there were 5 cities, And he was asking perhaps that maybe there are 10 within one city. And if there are 10 within one city, it can elevate the status of that city. And perhaps God, you'll be merciful and save the whole area. So we understand the 50, the 40, the 30, the 20, the 10. But the 45 always is one that brings forth questions. Why did he throw in this number? It's not an even number. What does 45? How do we understand the 45? So that's going to be question number one, to somehow try to appreciate the 45. What's Avraham asking for? And number two, when God tells him, you know what, I'm not going to destroy if they're 45, God uses the words lo ashchit. But then when he turns to 40, God says, you know what, if there are 40 there, lo eseh, I'm not going to do anything. If there are 40, worry not, the city will remain intact. And so too when it's 30, God says, lo eseh, I'm not going to do anything. On the other end, when he goes to 20 and 10, God says, listen here, if I find 20, lo ashchit, I'm not going to destroy the city, indicating that destroy not, but there's going to be some form of punishment. And so too, when God says, if there are 10, worry not, lo, what does God say? Lo ashchit, I'm not going to destroy, an indication that there'll be some form of punishment. So this is question number two I'm going to address. We understand why when God tells them for 40, I'm not going to do anything, right? Lo eseh. An indication that if there are 40 within the region, God's going to forgive them all. And so too with 30. With 20 and 10, God says, listen, I'm not going to destroy, but by God changing from eseh to ashchit, God is basically saying, you know what? I'm not going to go ahead and destroy, but I'm going to still do something, lo ashchit, right? But nevertheless, there'll be some form of punishment. So for 20 and 10, there's some form of punishment. But the question is, why, when we are looking at 45, God uses the language of